Jamille was only 18, but the eyes on her face told far more stories than her birth certificate ever could. Large, deep brown eyes that had seen the weight of a world where beauty was a burden and poverty a sentence. Her body drew stares, but never respect. Her voice, sweet and shy, was constantly silenced by the pressure of survival. She lived with her sick mother and younger brother in a single-room shack at the very end of 37th Street, where the roof wept on rainy days and the floor scorched on sunny ones. Her only hope of escaping that miserable life was a full scholarship at a community prep course, where she sold homemade sweets at the entrance just to gather a few coins. But time, relentless as it is, showed no mercy for the slow pace of dreams born from nothing. And it was there, on the corner where misery and beauty collided every day, that fate decided to offer her an unexpected path. Jason. Jason was a 60-year-old man who looked like he'd stepped out of a forbidden novel. White hair, a close-cropped beard to match, and a sculpted body chiseled by decades of discipline, emotional scars, and pure muscle. Yes, he was handsome, but a kind of handsome shadowed by ghosts. A billionaire whose heart was locked behind bars of pride, loneliness, and disillusionment. 3 failed marriages. 3 women who betrayed him, manipulated him, and reminded him that not all love is made to stay. Jason was hard, cold, calculated. Though he was surrounded by money, happiness always seemed to slip through his fingers like wet sand. When his eyes landed on Jamille, it wasn't for love, it was logic. He needed a wife for a corporate deal, someone to secure control in a family merger, a woman who could stand by his side in name only. And Jamille, with her softness, natural beauty, and desperate need for a way out, was perfect for the role. The proposal hit like an earthquake. Jason sought her out at the prep course, accompanied by his personal assistant, Doralice, and made the offer like a bank transaction. Blunt, dry, impersonal. Marriage, 1 year, monthly payment, medical care for her mother, education for her brother, a future. In exchange, Jamille would marry him, remain discreet, smile when needed, and play the role of a trophy wife. She didn't need to love. In fact, Jason preferred it that way. Love scared him more than any financial ruin. And Jamille, after days of silence, said yes. Not out of weakness, but out of courage, out of love for her family, out of need, and perhaps because of a feeling she couldn't yet explain. The wedding was quiet, yet made it to the tabloids due to the age gap, the class difference, and the striking contrast between them. While Jamille was branded a gold digger, naive, or poor thing, Jason was painted as an old predator, selfish and reckless, but neither of them seemed to care. She had heard worse on the streets. He had been judged enough not to bother. They married in a cold civil registry downtown, under the ironic gazes of Dolores, Jason's sister, and his arrogant cousin Danilo, who made no effort to hide his disgust toward Jamille. And yet, the young woman lifted her gaze, strong, her beauty untarnished, her soul wounded but undefeated. There was no honeymoon. Jason returned straight to work and handed her a credit card with a sky-high limit and a private room on the east wing of the mansion. "Buy whatever you want. Just don't bother me," he said, emotionless. Jamille smiled silently. This was the life she had chosen, if only for a year. But inside her chest, something began to stir, still too faint to name, like a breeze before a storm. And in Jason, despite his denial, that pure look in Jamille's eyes, so free of demands, judgment, or expectations, began to unravel the cold order in which he had locked his heart. Their story was only beginning, and what had started as a soulless contract was on the verge of becoming a love strong enough to defy the entire world. Jamille would never forget the day she truly met Jason. Not the name that graced corporate columns or the face featured in finance magazines, but the man in flesh and blood, seated in a leather armchair worth more than her entire life, his beard perfectly trimmed and his eyes sharp as razors. His office, perched atop a skyscraper that seemed to touch the sky, was quieter than any church she'd ever entered. And she, wearing the best clothes she could put together, a borrowed white blouse and a pair of old slacks her mother had saved for special occasions, felt like an ant in that realm of marble, glass, and arrogance. Doralis led her in like she was presenting a fragile, priceless artifact. Jason didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He simply looked her up and down, evaluating her like a rare auction item. The silence lingered too long before he finally spoke, his voice low and slow. "Do you know why you're here?" The question landed like a challenge. Jamille took a deep breath, pressed her fingers against her thigh, and answered firmly, "Because I need to save my family." Jason hadn't expected that. He was used to women orbiting him like satellites around money. But Jamille didn't orbit. She stood on her own feet, even as they trembled beneath her. And that was exactly what made Jason continue. He laid out the proposal with surgical precision. A marriage of convenience, no touching, no kissing, no expectations of love or pleasure. A contract, 1 year, a mutual favor. In exchange, he would cover all her mother's medical expenses, fund her brother's education, and give her a new last name, one that would open doors she never knew existed. Jamille listened without blinking. When he finished, she asked only one thing. "And what do you get out of this?" Jason smiled for the first time. A sad, almost sarcastic smile. Power. He needed to show the board of shareholders that he was stable, married, and committed to family values in order to retain his majority stake in a merger with the DeLuca family, a group of conservative investors. Jason wanted control, and marriage was the symbolic key, but he didn't trust any woman he knew. Then he saw Jamille from afar, selling sweets with pride and dignity outside the prep course, and thought, "She's the last woman on earth who would ever try to deceive me." So, the proposal was made. Jason assumed she'd vanish, frightened, but Jamille, her courage and desperation tied together like a knot, returned 2 days later with her answer. "I accept, but I have conditions." Jason raised his eyebrows, intrigued. Jamille asked to continue her studies, even if remotely. She wanted to visit her mother whenever possible, and she demanded that he never, ever treat her like a display doll. Jason laughed. It was the first time in years someone dared to make demands of him, and strangely enough, he respected every word. From that moment on, a contract was drafted. Doralis handed over a 30-page document filled with clauses and confidentiality agreements. Jamille signed it with a trembling hand, but steady eyes. On the final page, Jason wrote his name with coldness, but with a strange unease in his chest, as if he had just taken a step towards something he could no longer control. On her way out, Jamille didn't cry. She only felt a chill, as if she were about to dive into a deep, dark, unknown sea. There was no turning back now. In the following days, everything moved quickly. Designers were hired. Her image was shaped to look more mature, more elegant, more suitable for the role of a billionaire's wife. Jamille followed it all in silence, but deep inside, she was still the same girl who skipped meals so her mother could eat. Jason, meanwhile, kept his distance. He preferred not to know what she felt. It was easier to pretend this was all just business. But when the wedding day came, and he saw her walk into the registry office in a simple dress, hair down, eyes clear and pure as if she owed nothing to anyone, something inside him trembled. For the first time in ages, Jason felt fear. Fear of getting attached, fear of loving again, fear of not being able to keep the walls he had built around his heart. But it was still too early for that. The ceremony was brief. They signed the papers. Dolores's sharp stares and Danilo's venomous whispers followed them, mocking the whole thing. Jason didn't react. Jamille shut it all out. When they stepped outside, under the flash of paparazzi who had discovered the secret wedding, she whispered, "There, now we're husband and wife." Jason didn't answer. He just got into the car, waved at the driver and said, "Take her home. I'll be back tonight." And there, in the back seat, watching the city blur past the window, Jamille felt the weight of everything she had accepted, but she also felt hope. Maybe, just maybe, behind that frozen man, there was someone waiting to be truly loved, and she was about to find out. The mansion where Jamille now lived was a colossal structure, surrounded by tall walls, meticulously trimmed gardens, and a suffocating silence that made even footsteps echo with fear. Inside, every room looked like it had been designed by architects who had never known what a home truly felt like. Everything was functional, expensive, and cold. There was art on the walls, but no memories. Imported rugs, but no laughter. Heavy curtains, but no windows open to the world. It was in that soulless luxury that Jamille was greeted by Dolores, Jason's sister-in-law, with a smile so fake it could have been framed and hung beside the paintings. "The new Mrs. Wallace, I presume," she said, her voice dripping with poison. Jamille merely nodded. She knew she was stepping into more than a house. She was stepping into an invisible war, one where she was seen as an intruder, a gold digger, a threat. Jason didn't accompany her on the first day. He left it to Dolores to show her around, explain the meal times, warn her about the security cameras, and finally point to the bedroom where she'd be staying, on the east wing, as far as possible from his suite. "He's a man of strict routines," said the assistant, trying to sound neutral, though concern flickered in her voice. There were rules, many. Jason had established, both by contract and pride, strict boundaries. No physical intimacy unless mutually agreed upon later. No personal questions, no interviews, no public appearances without prior approval, and no contact with his closest relatives. "You'll be a silent but flawless wife. That's what's expected of you," Dolores added, handing her a planner filled with social commitments, etiquette training, English lessons, and even mandatory psychological monitoring. Jamille swallowed hard. It felt less like marriage and more like entering a luxury boarding school disguised as a contract. That first night, alone in her room, Jamille stared at the ceiling and thought about everything she had left behind. The scent of her mother's humble house, her little brother's innocent laugh, the freedom of walking barefoot without judgment. Now, she slept on thousand-thread sheets with $1 million view of the city and felt further from herself than ever before. Jason only showed up the next morning for a formal breakfast in the Grand Hall. He wore a dark, flawless suit, neatly trimmed beard, and an unreadable expression. Jamille, seated on the opposite side of a table as long as a bridge between two worlds, tried to smile. "Good morning," she said softly. Jason simply nodded, took a sip of coffee, and buried himself in emails on his tablet. "Are you comfortable?" he asked without looking up. "Yes," she lied. "Good," he replied, and silence fell between them like a lead weight. The days shaped themselves into routine. Jamille woke early, did her workouts with Dolores or the assigned trainer, attended posture and diction lessons, watched online classes to keep up with her studies, and occasionally accompanied Jason to events, always as a decorative, beautiful, discreet presence. Jason, on the other hand, kept his distance with the precision of an emotional surgeon. There were no touches, no warmth, just obligations. Yet even in this coldness, something began to shift. Jamille, with her poised education, honest smile, and dignified demeanor, started to confuse Jason. She didn't try to impose herself, but she never diminished either. She didn't provoke, yet never faded into the background. She was like a subtle ray of sunlight slipping through the closed shutters of his soul. Persistent, silent, but inevitable. One particular evening, after a formal dinner with executives and journalists, Jason entered his office and found Jamille reading alone, barefoot, sitting on the floor by a bookshelf. She was so immersed in the book she didn't notice him at first. He stood there, silently watching. She was beautiful. Young, yes, but with an old soul, full of layers. When she finally looked up and saw him, she smiled, effortlessly. "It's about women who pretend to be strong all the time," she said, closing the book. Jason raised an eyebrow. "And do you pretend?" he asked. Jamille took a deep breath and replied, "No, but sometimes I wish I did." That simple answer cracked something inside him. For the first time, he saw her as more than a pretty face or a solution to his problems. He saw a human being, fragile, strong, profound, and that scared him. From that night forward, something shifted. Jason began to notice things. The way Jamille folded napkins, how she treated the staff with kindness, the care she gave to the flowers in the garden, and most of all, the fact that she never asked anything of him, never demanded attention, never forced closeness. And that's what began to chip away at the wall he had spent decades building. Jamille, in turn, started to see cracks in the man of stone. Small gestures, a teacup left at her place, a book placed by her bedside, a note with kind instructions. Jason was still cold, yes, But now there was warmth hidden in the margins, and in their silence, love began to grow, invisible, shy, but increasingly inevitable. That night, the silverware seemed heavier than the silence that hovered over the solid wooden table, surrounded by napkins folded like flowers, and crystal glasses reflecting a golden artificial light. The dinner with the DeLucas wasn't just a social event. It was a minefield where every word could be weaponized against Jamille. The merger between Jason's holding and the DeLuca financial empire was practically sealed, but Jamille's presence as his new wife had stirred an unbearable tension. Dolores, Jason's sister, made a point of reminding everyone, with venomous smiles, that Jamille was far too young to handle such complex business. Meanwhile, Danilo, the arrogant cousin, didn't even bother to hide the disdain in his eyes. "So you're the one who conquered our old wolf's heart?" he said, raising his glass in a hypocritical toast. Jason didn't react, but Jamille felt the poison flow between the laughter and the clinking glasses. She looked stunning. A deep emerald green dress designed by a French stylist, hair loose with soft waves, light makeup that enhanced her natural beauty. But even adorned with jewels and expensive perfume, she knew that in their eyes, she was still the poor girl who had played her cards. The smiles were fake, the questions were traps. "What were you studying again?" asked one of Domenico DeLuca's daughters, sweet voice hiding a cruel glare. "Biology. I wanted to be a teacher," Jamille replied, keeping her tone firm despite her racing heart. "Oh, how cute. So simple," the other quipped, and then the malicious laughter spread like wildfire across dry paper. Jason, until then silent, tapped his fork against the plate. "Her education is far more noble than most of the flashy postgrads I see around this table." The room fell silent for a second, but the attacks continued, veiled in subtle irony. Jamille, however, didn't lower her head. She was there for something greater than wounded pride. With or without their respect, she was claiming what had once been unimaginable, the space of an unlikely woman among giants. When dessert was served, Dolores struck where it hurt the most, the age gap. "Jamille, darling, isn't it hard living with someone so much more experienced? I mean, 60 is nearly twice your age. What do you two even talk about?" The table burst into muffled chuckles. Jamille took a breath, looked into Jason's eyes, and replied with sharp serenity, "We talk like two mature people who know what they want. Age doesn't measure character or depth." For the first time that evening, Jason gave a real smile. And there, for the first time, Jamille realized she had power. Not the power of money or influence, but the power of not letting herself be destroyed. Jason saw it too. That 18-year-old girl he had chosen for convenience was now facing a room full of sharks with more courage than most men he had ever hired. After dinner, in the car ride home, the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was heavy, full of unspoken thoughts. Jason drove with a tense expression, eyes sharp on each traffic light, as if they were battles to be won. Jamille, on the other side, gripped the hem of her dress tightly, as if it anchored her to reality. Then he spoke. "They don't deserve you." She turned her head, surprised. "You don't need to please anyone, Jamille, not even me." It was the first time he said her name in that tone. No coldness, no formality, as if for once he truly saw who she was, and not just the role she was meant to play. Jamille smiled, and in that smile was something new, a silent affection, a feeling that, though still quiet, had begun to bloom between them. That night, Jamille didn't go straight to her room. She stopped on the mansion's veranda, took off her shoes, and stepped barefoot onto the cold stone floor. She needed to feel something real after so many masks. Jason watched her from a distance, through the office window, a forgotten glass of whiskey in his hand. Seeing her there, alone, silent, but standing, as strong as she was fragile, stirred something in him. For the first time in years, Jason felt the urge to protect someone without shielding himself first. And without knowing it, in that very moment, the two of them had taken the first step towards something no contract could ever predict. The beginning of true love. Time moved slowly in the days that followed the dinner. Jason's mansion felt even quieter, as if it absorbed the tension between the two residents who shared the same roof but not the same space. Jamille kept to her routine with flawless discipline, waking at 6, walking through the gardens with a book in hand, having breakfast alone on one of the white marble terraces, then dedicating herself to the online courses she had recently enrolled in. She spent hours in front of the computer, taking meticulous notes, as if studying were her way of keeping her feet grounded, while everything around her was made of glass and traps. In the afternoons, she tended to the flowers, the ones no one else noticed, and at night, she read until sleep came. Jason, in turn, remained locked in his office, surrounded by numbers, meetings, contracts, and memories he refused to revisit. The meeting with the DeLucas had stirred something in both of them, something no contract clause had anticipated, a kind of existential unease, a quiet warning that change was coming. Their coexistence was built on long silences, a passing glance in the hallway, a teacup left on the table, no note, but with meaning, a whispered "good night" from the other side of the stairs, and suddenly, gestures began to speak for them. Jason started noticing the details, how Jamille arranged the books by color, how she folded the kitchen towels with care, how she smiled at the cook, Donna Dalila, with a sweetness he hadn't seen in decades. He, who had convinced himself that no woman could love without expecting something in return, found himself disturbed by the fact that Jamille asked for nothing. She didn't probe into his life. She didn't invade his space. She simply existed, with dignity, silence, and a beauty that went far beyond appearance. It was soul. Jamille, on the other hand, began to see that Jason wasn't just the bitter man people said he was. He was respectful to his staff, discreet in his gestures, protective of those under his care. He didn't smile often, but when he did, rarely, there was truth in it. He was the kind of man who took care silently, who solved problems before they turned into crises. A man who had built empires, but never learned how to build bridges with his own heart. And maybe that's exactly what brought them closer. They were both trapped in lives they had never truly chosen, but had learned to endure, each in their own way, in silence, in struggle. It was on a cold Friday night that the first crack appeared. Jason walked into the dining room, dressed in casual clothes, something rare, and instead of eating in his office as he usually did, he sat at the table across from Jamille. She looked up, surprised. "I thought you wouldn't be dining here tonight," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "I felt like changing things up," he replied. The conversation died there for a few long seconds, until he asked, "Do you like it here?" She hesitated. "The house is beautiful, but I don't know if I like it." Jason stared at his plate for a moment before saying, "I never liked it either." It was the first time they shared an unfiltered truth. No masks, no pretense, just a raw sliver of honesty. That same night, Jamille heard a noise coming from the garden. Jason, shirtless and sweating, was punching a training bag hung from a tree. His chiseled muscles glistened under the spotlight, and for a moment, she didn't just see a strong man. She saw a broken man. With each punch, it was as if he exorcised old pain. She stood there, watching silently, feeling a compassion she couldn't yet explain. She wanted to get closer, to touch him, to ask what hurt so deeply, but it was still too soon. And she knew that deep wounds do not heal in haste. The next morning, when she woke up, she found a small bouquet of garden flowers on her desk. No note, no signature, but the gesture spoke louder than any words. Jamille smiled to herself. It was the beginning of something, still nameless, still shapeless, but real. And while the outside world continued judging, mocking, and betting against them, inside that mansion of marble and silence, two souls had begun to recognize themselves in each other's reflection, even if they wouldn't admit it. Love, though denied, already lived there, and it wasn't going anywhere. It was on a grey afternoon, the kind that carries a lazy melancholy in the air, that the unexpected happened. The mansion, usually as silent as an empty temple, echoed with a loud sound from the main wing, a mix of impact and pain. Jamille ran instinctively down the marble stairs until she found Jason on the floor at the foot of the staircase. His strong, imposing body was twisted awkwardly, one hand gripping his ankle, his expression contorted in a mix of physical pain and frustration. The staff rushed toward him, but it was Jamille who acted with the most clarity. She knelt beside him, touched his shoulder with unexpected gentleness, and whispered, Don't move. We'll help you. Jason, proud as ever, tried to push her away. I'm fine. I don't need... But the pain interrupted him. It was clear his ankle was injured, and for the first time before her, he wasn't the invincible billionaire. He was just a 60-year-old man, vulnerable, fallen, exposed. With the help of 2 staff members, he was carried to the couch in the main living room. Jamille didn't leave his side for a second. While Doralice arranged for a private doctor, she knelt again, took a cushion, and carefully propped up Jason's foot. The pain lingered, but something else filled the room, the discomfort of someone unaccustomed to being cared for. Jason watched her in silence, as if trying to understand who this girl was, who, instead of exploiting his weakness, was treating him with a compassion he had almost forgotten existed. You don't have to stay here, he murmured, still breathless. It's not in the contract. Jamille lifted her gaze steady and replied, I'm not part of a contract. I'm part of your life, at least for now. Those words, so honest and human, shattered something inside him. When the doctor arrived and confirmed it was a sprained ankle requiring complete rest for several days, Jason grew even more irritated with himself. He hated feeling weak, especially in front of Jamille. But the young woman never treated him like a broken man. On the contrary, she treated him as someone worthy of care, patience, and presence. Over the following days, it was she who stayed close, preparing calming teas, reading to him as he rested, even helping answer some emails with his approval. Jamille, with her simple and steady way, transformed his routine without asking for anything. Jason, so used to women who turned his vulnerabilities into leverage, didn't know how to handle it. But deep down, in silence, he was beginning to surrender. One particularly cold night, Jason couldn't sleep. His ankle ached, but something deeper unsettled him. He got up with difficulty, dragging his leg, and found Jamille in the library, wrapped in a blanket, reading beneath the amber glow of a lamp. You shouldn't be awake, he said. Neither should you, she replied, eyes still on the page. Jason stepped closer, sat in the armchair across from her, and said nothing for long minutes. Then, in a near confessional tone, he spoke. I've been betrayed so many times, Jamille. I started seeing every act of kindness as a threat. She slowly closed the book and looked at him. And what do you see in me? Jason hesitated. I see something I don't understand, something that confuses me. Jamille moved closer, sat beside him on the couch, and said with gentle firmness, You don't have to understand it now. You just have to feel it. That was the moment when his armor truly began to crack. Jason looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. And there, in the quiet of that room, no kisses, no excessive touches, just a long exchange of glances loaded with unspoken emotion. Something was born between them, a feeling still unnamed, but impossible to ignore. Jamille, with her youthful maturity, had done what no rich, experienced, or strategic woman had managed before. She touched Jason's heart without forcing her way in. She loved without pressure, cared without asking for anything in return. And he, without knowing how, was already falling in love, even if he was still trying to deny it. Jason's recovery required rest, but what no one knew, perhaps not even he, was that the real healing wasn't happening in his injured ankle. It was unfolding inside him. In the days following the accident, Jamille's constant presence became as natural as the morning light pouring through the veranda. She wasn't intrusive, never asked about the past, never pressured him for anything beyond silence and care. With delicate hands, she brewed the tea exactly the way he liked it, without ever being told. With attentive eyes, she adjusted the sofa cushions before he had a chance to ask. And with her calm voice, she read aloud passages from books he would never have chosen himself, but that, inexplicably, made him feel like he was being embraced from within. In that house where touch had always been forbidden, avoided or weaponized, the first real gesture came like lightning on a dry night. It was a Sunday afternoon. Jason, stubborn as always, tried descending a few steps alone and lost his balance. Jamille, just behind him, caught him quickly by the arms. The fall wasn't serious, but the fright was. When she held him, their faces close enough that their noses almost touched, their eyes locked for a second far too long to be dismissed as mere reflex. Jason inhaled sharply, his chest rising and falling with the effort of self-control. Jamille didn't let go immediately, and in that unplanned touch, without luxury, without perfume, without pretense, something was said in silence. His body, so used to armor, felt the warmth of her hands like fire, not a fire of desire, but of truth. "Sorry, I just didn't want you to fall," she said, her cheeks flushed with sincerity. Jason composed himself, stepped back gently, and replied simply, "Thank you." It could have ended there. It could have been just a moment of physical tension. But the truth is, after that touch, nothing was the same. Jason began to look for her with his eyes. He started to recognize the sound of her footsteps around the house, like a familiar melody. He began to prefer meals when she was present, and he realized that his body, shaped by time, strength, and discipline, now responded to Jamille's softness with a strange mix of peace and restlessness. Jamille changed too. She no longer saw Jason merely as the cold man in a suit with a white beard. She started to notice his calloused hands, shaped by years of writing and fighting. She paid attention to the way he closed his eyes when taking a deep breath, as if wrestling inner demons. She began to admire him in silence, not for his money, not for his status, but for the humanity buried beneath layers and layers of pain. And she began to hope, with a sweetness almost childlike, that he would learn to trust her, even if just a little. And one day, as she entered his office with a tray of tea, Jason spoke without lifting his eyes from the laptop. "You've cared for me more than any woman who's ever been in my life." The sentence hung in the air like a secret accidentally revealed. Jamille, unsure of what to say, simply set down the tray and stayed silent. Jason looked at her, and in his eyes was a silent plea. "Stay." And she did. She sat in the chair beside him and, without noticing, began to share childhood stories. She told him about selling sweets at school, about the time she fell off her bike and laughed instead of crying, about her little brother imitating animals to make her forget the hunger. Jason listened without interrupting. Each word was like a key unlocking an old door inside him. And when Jamille, without thinking, placed her hand over his while recalling one of those memories, Jason didn't pull away. For the first time, he let himself be touched without fear. That night, there were no kisses, no confessions, but something far greater began. Trust. A quiet love, built not in bedrooms, but in small gestures, innocent exchanges, a kind of intimacy no contract could ever foresee. Jason, the man who swore never to get attached, found himself waiting for Jamille at every moment of the day. And Jamille, the girl who vowed not to fall in love, started dreaming of him at night. The line between agreement and affection had been crossed, and now there was no going back. What they didn't know yet was that the past, no matter how well buried, always finds a way to knock on the door. And on that overcast Tuesday afternoon, that's exactly what happened. Jamille was in the garden, kneeling beside the freshly planted hydrangeas, when she heard the main gate swing open with unusual violence. The sound of luxury car tires tearing through the quiet entrance of the mansion drew attention even from the staff. Jason, who at that moment was wrapping up a video conference, stood immediately upon hearing the voice. A voice he knew too well. A voice he had hoped never to hear again. Douglas. Douglas was the ex-husband of Dandara, Jason's second wife, a man who, behind a polished appearance, had ruined deals, manipulated contracts, and nearly drove Jason to bankruptcy during a toxic divorce filled with blackmail, betrayal, and even media scandals. His presence now, years later, felt like a blade dragging across a wound that had barely healed, and he didn't come alone. In his hand, he carried a leather folder and a cynical smile. "Jason, what a surprise to see you still collecting young wives. Is this the latest?" he said, eyeing Jamille from head to toe with a disgusting stare. Jason, in a protective impulse, stepped in front of her like a human shield. "Don't you dare talk about her," he said in a low voice, loaded with fury. Douglas ignored the warning. He walked around the room with the arrogance of someone who thinks they're untouchable. "Relax, Jason. I just came to remind you of a tiny detail. You still have a legal matter pending with me, a clause in that investment fund we shared. And now with your merger with the DeLucas, I've got the perfect timing to drag you down. Again." Jason clenched his fists. Jamille, sensing the tension in the air, stepped closer. "Do you want me to leave?" she whispered. But Jason squeezed her hand tightly, discreetly. "Stay," he said. It wasn't just a request. It was a decision. Jason never let anyone see his ghosts. But this time, he chose to face them with her by his side. Doralus arrived with security, and Douglas was escorted out, though not without first leaving an envelope of documents behind. "See you in court, darling," he sneered. As soon as the door closed, Jason dropped onto the couch like the weight of years had fallen on his shoulders once again. Jamille knelt in front of him, holding his knees with both hands. "You don't have to face this alone." Jason lowered his eyes, overcome. "I should have spared you from this. He's dangerous. He can destroy reputations with words. And now, he'll come after you too." Jamille, with the strength of someone who grew up confronting humiliation daily, replied calmly, "I have no reputation to lose, but I have you, and I'll protect you however I can." That night, Jason finally told everything. He spoke of the pain of his second marriage, how Dandara had betrayed him with Douglas while still his wife. He recounted the legal manipulation, the millions he lost trying to prove his innocence, and how it turned him into the cold man Jamille had met. "I died back then, Jamille. All that remained was the money. But the man, the one who dreamed, who believed in people, disappeared." She cried silently while listening. Then she leaned in, pressing her forehead to his, a gesture more intimate than any kiss. "Then let me help bring him back," she whispered. It was the first time Jason truly cried in front of someone since being destroyed by the one he had loved the most. And as Jamille wiped his tears with her own fingers, she realized the love she felt was no longer admiration. It was surrender. Jason wasn't just the man who saved her from poverty. He was now the man she would fall for if needed. And from that moment on, she knew. She would stay by his side, no matter what happened, because it was no longer about contracts, status, or the future. It was about a past that needed healing. And she, with all her light, would be Jason's cure. Even if the world didn't understand, even if everyone judged, even if it hurt, it was love, pure, unexpected, and final. The days following Douglas's visit were marked by a different kind of silence. No longer the silence of indifference or solitude, but the silence of something about to happen, like the stillness before a storm tears open the sky. Jason was more introspective, but not distant. His gestures toward Jamille had changed. Now, he looked at her with depth, listened with genuine attention, and his presence felt less like a watchful boss and more like a man trying to learn how to feel again. Jamille had changed too. She walked through the house with a new posture, a renewed spark in her eyes. She knew that despite everything, she was winning Jason's heart, but there was still something unspoken between them, something physical, intimate, long guarded, long feared, the moment their bodies would stop avoiding each other. And that moment came on a rainy night, when a fierce storm hit the city and the mansion's power went out. The backup generators had failed, temporarily. Jason, restless, made his way down to the living room with a flashlight and found Jamille sitting on the couch, hugging her knees, surrounded by candlelight. She smiled when she saw him. "Looks like tonight, fate decided to leave us in the dark," she said with light irony. Jason smiled back, still rare, and replied, "Maybe it's in the dark that we see things more clearly." He sat beside her, and the silence that followed was dense, full of layers. The only soundtrack was the rain tapping the windows and the sound of their breathing, slowly falling into sync. "Are you afraid of me?" Jason asked, not looking directly at her. Jamille took a moment before answering. "I was, but now I'm afraid of myself." Jason turned, intrigued. "Why?" She drew a deep breath. "Because I don't know how to pretend anymore. Because everything that began out of necessity has become love." Her confession hung between them like lightning splitting the night sky. Jason remained still for several seconds before reaching out to touch her face gently, as if testing the reality of what he was hearing. "You don't have to love me, Jamille," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I never asked that of you. I don't want to hurt you." She held his hand firmly. "But I want to, and you don't hurt me. Let me show you that I see you, Jason, with everything you carry, and I still choose to stay." The kiss didn't come in haste. It wasn't hungry. It was reverent. When their lips finally met, it felt as though every wall collapsed at once. Jason held her like he was touching something sacred, and Jamille surrendered with the certainty of someone who knew she was exactly where she belonged. Their bodies, so different in age, in history, in scars, met in a slow, intimate, truthful dance. There was no blind lust, only desire shaped by time, by respect, by emotion. Jason, who for years hadn't let anyone touch him with tenderness, cried silently as he felt Jamille's skin against his own. And she, who had guarded her virginity out of fear, trauma, and self-protection, gave herself to him not out of obligation, but by choice. It was a long night, made of gentle touches, quiet words, and intertwined hands. In Jason's room, there was no more contract, no more distance. There were only two souls, stripped of everything, clothing, pain, past, truly meeting for the first time. When morning came, Jamille slept curled against him, her face resting on his chest, her fingers still laced with his. Jason didn't sleep. He spent hours watching her face in the soft light of dawn, trying to understand when, exactly, he had fallen in love. But the truth was that love had grown slowly, like a root beneath the surface, and now it was blooming, strong, pure, and final. What had been intimate, pure, and silent was torn apart by the cruelty of the world in the most brutal way. Just 2 days after the night Jason and Jamille gave themselves to one another, body and soul, the internet was flooded with a video. A muted clip, taken from an internal security camera, showed only a brief scene. Jason and Jamille entering the bedroom holding hands, smiling like two lovers newly awakened. The footage was short, with no nudity, no explicit content, but it was enough. Enough for gossip sites, venomous columnists, and mockery pages to spread it like wildfire. The 60-year-old billionaire and his teenage wife. Love or a well-played con? That was the tamest headline. The rest was far worse. Jamille, who never sought fame, saw her face plastered everywhere. Photoshopped images with cruel captions, TikTok videos mocking the age gap, accusations claiming she was an escort disguised as a wife, sexist jokes, offensive memes. All of it invaded her world like a slap to the soul. Jason, in turn, felt the kind of rage only men truly in love can feel. Not for himself, but for her. For the way they were tearing apart the image of a woman who had never harmed anyone. The house, once quiet, now buzzed with phone calls, lawyers activated, journalists camping outside. Dolores and Danilo, as expected, used the chaos as their stage. I told you, this is all she wanted. Fame, scandal, and exposure, Danilo said in an interview that only made things worse. Jason snapped. He called an emergency press conference, something he never did. Wearing a black suit, flanked by his lawyers and holding Jamille's hand, he walked into the Wallace Coors Convention Hall. Hundreds of cameras captured the moment he stepped on stage, adjusted the microphone, and faced the crowd with the resolve of a man who refused to be silenced. The video going around doesn't show a scandal. It shows the birth of a real love. And if you can't see that, the problem isn't ours. It's yours. The room went still. Jason continued. This woman beside me is not a gold digger, not a victim, and certainly not a trophy. She is my wife, the best part of my life, and if anyone here has the courage to say otherwise to my face, I'm ready to listen. It was the first time Jamille cried in public, not out of sorrow, but emotion. Jason hadn't just defended her, he had claimed her, out loud, in full, with all the risks, with all the consequences. But, as expected, love provokes. The video went even more viral, now with clips of the speech and a fresh wave of polarization. Some defended them as an unlikely couple who overcame cliches. Others attacked harder, accusing Jamille of emotional manipulation. And when old photos of her humble childhood home surfaced, the cruelty intensified. From the shack to the throne. Cinderella 2025. It was the kind of comment that cut deep. Jamille, though trying to stay strong, felt the blow. She stopped going out, deleted her apps, slept little, avoided even the staff in the mansion. Jason noticed, and it was in seeing the woman he loved slowly fading that he made a radical decision. He sent a letter to the shareholders, formally declining the merger with the DeLucas. He walked away from billions. "There isn't a company on earth worth more than the peace of the woman I love," he wrote. The news hit like a bomb. Dolores lost her mind. Danilo threatened to sue. But Jason didn't back down. That same night, he found Jamille sitting alone in the bedroom, gazing out over the city. He approached and said firmly, "You don't have to be strong on your own. I'm here. And if the whole world wants to throw stones at us, then let's bleed holding hands." That was the moment Jamille understood, with her entire being, what true love meant. It wasn't touch. It wasn't desire. It wasn't romantic gestures. It was choice, the daily decision, the sacrifice. Jason had put his fortune, his name, his legacy on the line, for her. And in that instant, unseen, without applause or cameras, she embraced him like she'd never let go. It no longer mattered what they said, what they judged, or what they might still do. They were together, and that now was the only truth that mattered. The pressure on the couple had become unbearable. With each passing day, Jason received more calls from investors, board members, former allies, all furious, outraged, threatening. His decision to cancel the merger with the DeLucas, though the most honorable of his career, had cost billions in assets and openly severed alliances that had taken decades to build. Wallace Corp began suffering quiet retaliation. Partnerships withdrawn, contracts suspended, and the financial media started questioning his sanity. The articles changed tone, from romantic to unstable, and Jason, who had so far endured everything with dignity, began to falter. But what hurt him the most wasn't what they said. It was what Jamille felt. The young woman who had fought so hard to preserve her joy began to wither. She hated being the reason he was losing everything, hated being labeled a burden, an obstacle. What had once been judgment now felt like a moral storm unleashed upon her, as if simply agreeing to that marriage had broken some invisible rule of the cruel world they lived in. Jason saw it, felt it, and for the first time since falling in love with Jamille, he considered doing the unthinkable, letting her go. He spent sleepless nights pacing in his office. He reread the original contract several times, as if searching for a clause that could justify an honorable exit. But there were no cold clauses left, only history, tears, love. He looked at himself in the mirror and wondered if he was being selfish, if loving someone, in this case, meant letting them go, if staying by her side at this pace would end up destroying her. And so, on a sad afternoon, Jason called her to the library. Jamille entered with tired eyes, no makeup, wearing a loose shirt and messy hair, yet to him, she looked more beautiful than ever. "I need to tell you something," Jason began, his voice strained. Jamille looked at him intently. "I love you, more than I've ever loved anyone, more than I thought I could, but I can't be the reason for your pain anymore." She frowned, confused. "What are you saying?" Jason swallowed hard. "I'm asking for a divorce, not because I want to leave you, but because I want you to be free. Free from me, from my enemies, from the weight of my name, from the war that was never yours." Silence fell like a curtain. Jamille took time to react. Her heart, already fragile, cracked audibly. "You're leaving me?" she asked, voice trembling. Jason knelt before her, held her hands and said, "I'm not leaving you. I'm giving you back the chance to live without fear, to smile without worrying who will throw the next stone. I'm giving you back peace, because loving someone also means knowing when to let go." The tears ran down Jamille's face like broken rivers. She wanted to scream, to say she didn't need peace if it meant being away from him, that she didn't want freedom if it meant being alone. But deep down, she knew that this gesture, though cruel, came from a colossal love. The divorce was signed 2 days later. No ceremony, no farewell, no scandal. Jason left a letter on the nightstand where she slept, a letter with 3 words, "I'll always return." Jamille returned to her mother's house, started from scratch, tried to study again, tried to smile for her brother, but nothing was the same. Her soul was marked, stitched together by a love that no time or distance could erase. Jason, in turn, buried himself in work with cold determination, became harder than ever, but every night, without fail, he opened the drawer where he kept the wedding ring and held it in his hand, as if it were his only remaining link to his humanity. The love between them hadn't died. It had only been tested, a test only truly committed hearts could survive. But it was still too soon to know. The world thought that love had been buried, but it didn't know there was something invisible between them, a silent promise made with tears, with pain, and with hope, because true love, even when separated, doesn't disappear. It only waits for the right moment to be reborn. Jason's absence echoed in everything. At home, the silence was deeper than usual. On the streets, Jamille's steps always seemed to walk alongside a missing presence that followed her like a shadow. In her soul, the emptiness he had left behind wasn't just the absence of a man. It was the absence of everything she had become when she met him. Back in the suburban neighborhood where she grew up, the rooms in the old house felt smaller, more suffocating. Her mother, though moved by her return, could see her daughter had changed. And her little brother, always smiling, innocently asked why she wasn't living in the castle anymore. Jamille replied with vague words and tear-filled eyes. It wasn't the castle she missed, it was the king, and the love she lived inside those walls, a love the world didn't have the courage to understand. She tried to keep busy. She resumed her studies, helped take care of her mother, went back to selling sweets at the bus stop, but every gesture carried within it a memory of what she had lived with Jason. Making tea reminded her of how he liked the water at a very specific temperature. Lying down reminded her of the weight of his arm gently wrapping around her. Walking down the street, she still heard malicious comments, echoes of the scandal, and lowered her gaze with the quiet strength of someone who no longer needed to explain herself. It wasn't shame, it was exhaustion. Exhaustion from a world that doesn't know how to recognize love when it doesn't fit into the storefront of what's considered normal. Jason, in turn, didn't forget her for a single moment. The mansion felt emptier than ever. The staff walked around silently, as if observing a quiet morning. Doralice tried once or twice to bring up the subject, but Jason silenced her with a single look. He returned to training obsessively, as if he could sweat out the pain. Slept little, ate even less, but worked twice as hard, trying to protect the empire that had nearly crumbled because of a feeling he could no longer deny. He loved Jamille more than anything he had ever possessed in life, and no matter how right it seemed to let her go, he couldn't help wondering if doing the right thing had been, this time, the biggest mistake of his life. Time passed. 1 month, 2, 3. The headlines cooled down. The gossip sites moved on to other scandals. The world moved forward. But Jason and Jamille remained frozen in that decision, until something made them tremble again. Jamille began to feel ill often, morning sickness, extreme sensitivity, dizziness. At first, she thought it was stress, but then a small detail came like a divine whisper in the middle of the storm. Her period was late. She took a test, positive, took another, confirmed. Jamille was pregnant, with the man she loved, the man who had tried to set her free. But now, she carried inside her a life that was half hers and half his. The world spun beneath her feet. She cried, trembled, smiled, and panicked, all at once. But one thing was clear inside her. That child was born from a love so true that no cruelty in the world could erase it. She didn't know what to do, didn't know how to tell him. She feared Jason's reaction, feared reopening all the wounds, all the exposure, all the pain that had barely begun to heal. And yet, deep down, she knew this child was the silent answer from a universe that, even cruel, sometimes grants miracles. Jamille wrote a letter, not to beg, not to seek consolation, but to tell the truth. She wrote it slowly, with tears, with love, told him about the symptoms, the tests, what she felt, told him she didn't expect anything, didn't demand anything. She only wanted him to know that the result of that one night of love wasn't a mistake. It was a gift, a life. She folded the paper carefully, placed it in a white envelope, and handed it to Doralice, not knowing if it would be read, answered, or simply ignored. Jason received the letter in the middle of a meeting. He recognized the name on the envelope and froze. He read it then and there, in the silence of a glass conference room, surrounded by men in suits talking about profits and strategies. And when he finished reading, He didn't say a word. He simply stood up, walked out of the room, got in his car, and drove, without thinking, heart pounding harder than at any moment in his life. He knew where she lived, knew the way, and now he also knew he needed to go back. Jason drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road, but his thoughts flying far beyond the strips of asphalt cutting through the city. The letter was still in his hand, crumpled from the sweat of his fingers, marked by the weight of words that would change everything. "You're going to be a father." 3 words, but with the impact of thunder crashing into a sky he thought had already collapsed completely. And at the end of the letter, there was more than just a revelation. There was a goodbye. "I never deserved you, Jason, and I don't want this child to grow up as a debt. He won't be your obligation. He'll be my miracle and your freedom." As he read those final lines, something inside him shattered with silent fury. Because for the first time, Jason understood that Jamille had never wanted to take anything from him. She had only ever given love, care, forgiveness, and now, a life. When the car stopped in front of the modest house where she lived, Jason didn't get out right away. He sat there, staring at the unfinished walls, the iron gate creaking in the wind, and he remembered the first time he saw her, selling sweets outside her prep course, with a shy smile and a dignity no luxury could erase. He took a deep breath, straightened his shirt, and walked to the door. Knocked twice. Silence. Knocked again. Until Jamille's mother appeared. The woman's eyes, marked by time and sorrow, widened at the sight of him. "She went out," she said, hesitantly. Jason's heart froze. "Where to?" The woman looked at the envelope in his hand and replied, "To the hospital." Jason's blood turned cold. Within seconds he was back in the car. He drove like the road was his lifeline. Upon arriving at the hospital, he went straight to the reception. "Jamille, Wallace, did she come in?" The receptionist typed something, looked up, and nodded. "She's under observation. Mild hemorrhage. Emotional stress." Jason closed his eyes for a second. The pain rose from his stomach to his throat. He ran down the halls until he found the room, and when he opened the door he saw her, pale, lying down, with a tired expression, and yet still beautiful. Beside the bed, holding her hand, was Donna Dalila, the mansion's cook, who had kept in touch with Jamille in secret. Jamille slowly turned her head. When she saw Jason, her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say a word. She just looked at him, and that look said everything. Surprise, fear, guilt, longing. Jason walked to her, knelt by the bed, took her hand tightly, and whispered, "You didn't take anything from me. You gave me everything." She began to cry, her body trembling with emotion. He kissed her hand, her tears, her forehead. "Don't ever say again that you don't deserve me. I was the one who didn't deserve you. But if you still want me, if there's still space for me in this future, then let me fight for you both." Jamille could barely speak, so deep was her emotion. But through sobs, she murmured, "Why did you come back, Jason?" And he answered, voice thick with emotion, "Because I can't breathe knowing you're suffering alone. Because this child is part of us. Because I love you, Jamille. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because you healed me. And now all I want is to spend the rest of my life taking care of you back." The doctor walked in, interrupting gently with a soft smile. "She's out of danger, but she needs complete rest. The baby is fine. She just needs peace." Jason nodded, eyes still wet. And in that moment, something changed forever. He was no longer the hardened, proud, and broken billionaire. He was simply a man, finally surrendered, finally vulnerable, finally whole. And she, though weak, knew that he was there to stay. Jamille's recovery was slow but steady. Jason insisted on being present for every step, transforming the once silent mansion, formerly a stage of loneliness and pride, into a true home. The days became gentle. She now read aloud to him in the mornings. He made coffee for her at night, and together they planned the nursery for the baby on the way. But outside the golden gates, the world still burned in flames of judgment. Wallace Corp was under legal attack. Douglas, Dandara's ex-husband, had reactivated old lawsuits with forged evidence, including a supposed embezzlement case involving manipulated transactions under Jason's name. The accusation was severe, corporate fraud, and the goal was clear: to destroy Jason. And the timing, cruelly calculated, precisely when he had found redemption in the arms of the woman he loved. The lawyers were skeptical. "We need an aggressive defense," they said. "Someone who can prove his character before society. But the only one who could do that is his wife." Jason refused. "I'll never put Jamille in the world's courtroom again." But Jamille, upon hearing that, interrupted with a serene gaze and an unshakable voice. "Then I'll put myself there." Jason tried to stop her, but she was firm. "You've already sacrificed everything for me. Now it's my turn to fight for you." On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. The media lined up outside, flashes blinding, and columnists eager to turn every detail into a spectacle. But when Jamille entered, pregnant, dignified, wearing a simple dress and with eyes sharp as steel, the murmurs stopped. Her presence was a screaming silence. When she was called to testify, she walked to the witness stand as if walking to the gallows, but with the dignity of a queen. And when the judge asked if she was there out of obligation, she replied, "I'm here for love and for justice." For 40 minutes, Jamille told her story. From the day she met Jason to the letter she wrote, believing she was saying goodbye. She spoke of the contract, the distance, his pride, but also the compassion hidden in his most subtle gestures. She described in detail how he gave up billions for her, how he abandoned the most important merger of his career just so she could have peace. Jason Wallace is not a perfect man, but he is the most honorable one I've ever met. If there is any crime here, it is the world trying to criminalize the love between a poor woman and an older man. And if today he's being judged, it's for loving someone the world thinks isn't worthy. I am that woman, and I say with pride, he saved me. Now it's my turn to save him. The room remained silent. Not even the prosecutors could formulate an immediate response. The judge thanked her testimony and called for a recess. Outside, the crowd waited. Jason, who had listened with teary eyes, walked up to her the moment she exited the courtroom and simply said, "You changed my story." And she replied, "You taught me what it means to love for real." Hours later, the verdict was announced. Jason Wallace was cleared of all charges. The judge stated there was insufficient evidence and that the lawsuit demonstrated clear bad faith on the part of the accuser, motivated by personal interest and emotional revenge. Douglas was fined and sued for defamation. And at that moment, as the news spread, something unexpected happened. The once cruel public began to shift their tone. Videos of Jamille's testimony went viral. Phrases like, "Love won," "a billionaire who can truly love," "she wasn't an opportunist, she was a heroine," began to appear online. For the first time, Jason and Jamille were not seen as a scandal, but as an example. And even if there were still those who mocked, who judged, who were bothered, it didn't matter anymore. They had won, together, hand in hand, against the world. The sky was clear, the air light like it hadn't been in ages, and the flowers seemed to bloom earlier that morning. A morning that, without exaggeration, would mark the rebirth of 2 lives. Time had passed. Not much, but enough to heal wounds that once seemed incurable. Jason and Jamille were back at the mansion, but it was no longer the cold marble fortress that once separated them with distant hallways. Now, every room had color, the scent of flowers, soft laughter, and the sound of footsteps coming from 2 hearts in perfect harmony. The house that once held loneliness now breathed love. The baby was about to be born. Jamille, with her belly full and round, walked calmly through the halls where she once felt judged and watched. Now, she was revered. The staff, once tense, now treated her with genuine admiration. Doralice, once reserved, now called her "my girl." Jason, in turn, seemed like a new man. Though his body still showed strength and presence, his eyes were calmer, his gestures softer. The pride was still there, but now it was channeled into protection, not distance. He hadn't just declared his love for Jamille publicly. He lived it every day with intensity, like a man who finally understood that the true luxury in life isn't what you can buy, but what you can feel. That's when Jason made the final decision, to propose to Jamille for real. No contract, no interests, no cold clauses. A proposal moved solely by the love that blossomed through adversity. He prepared everything in secret. In the garden of the mansion, among the hydrangeas she had planted herself, he set up a simple altar with their photos, flowers picked by his own hands, and a soundtrack with her favorite song, the one she used to hum softly at night when she thought she was alone. When she stepped outside and saw it all, her eyes filled with tears. Jason, in a dark blue suit and wearing the smile only she knew, knelt down, even with his ankle still sore, and said, "Now I ask you with love, will you marry me again? As my wife, as the mother of my son, as the love of my life?" Jamille cried, uncontrollably, but with the most radiant face anyone had ever seen. "Yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Yes, 1,000 times." And so, under the sky that now blessed them, before a few true guests, only the real ones, Donna Dalila, Doralice, Jamille's little brother, and a few loyal friends, they got married. For real. No flashes, no headlines, no fear. Months later, David was born, a name Jason chose in honor of his father, who taught him that real men cry, care, and start over. Jason held his son in his arms as if he were the trophy of the most important battle of his life. And in that moment, he understood that everything he had lost over the years, money, status, false friendships, meant nothing compared to what he now had, a family, a woman who loved him not for what he owned, but for who he was, and a son who, in his very first cry, carried the certainty that true love survives anything. Years later, Jason and Jamille would go on to found a construction and renovation company together, where they hired young people from underprivileged communities to offer training and dignified work. The company grew, became a reference, not just for excellence, but for its purpose. And Jamille, the 18-year-old girl once labeled an opportunist, now gave lectures on dignity, strength, and love, always with Jason at her side, always with their son in her arms, always with eyes shining just like on that very first day. Because when love is real, it doesn't just win, it heals, it transforms, it begins again, and it endures.